Hello, I'm Michelle Amato, the lead educator for the Pine Project. In this first module, we will be addressing self-awareness. Castle reminds us that self-awareness includes the ability to understand one's emotions, thoughts, and values. It asks us to examine how human experiences influence behavior across contexts. Self-awareness requires us to look within ourselves and assess our attitudes, our emotional states, and to get us grounded in the things that help us find purpose. In our work with the Pine Project, we found identity to be the key to developing self-awareness competencies. These competencies are essential in gaining the skills you've come here to explore and improve. Being self-aware enables us to highlight our strengths and address our weaknesses, including the biases we all carry. In these modules, we are using the Immigrant and New Generation picture books from the Welcoming Library Pine Collection to explore this work. We will get grounded with 7 picture books and 12 reflective opportunities presented by Kirsten Cappy from I'm Your Neighbor Books.
Welcome to I'm Your Neighbor Books. In this room, our nonprofit reviews immigrant and new generation children's books and curates them into collections called Welcoming Libraries. At this point, you should have access to the 30 books in the Welcoming Library Pine Collection and are ready to read and reflect. This picture book, I'm an American, is a gift to the work you're embarking on. From the very first spread, the book models crucial classroom conversations. What do you think makes a person an American? Where we live, the way we look, the tradition our families follow? I think being an American is something more. I'm an American because. What follows are 12 answers to I'm an American because. The first answer reads, I believe in democracy. Every adult should be able to vote for who they trust and the ideas they value. A few of my male ancestors came from China more than 150 years ago. They lived in California for many of those years, but because of a law preventing non-white immigrants from becoming citizens, they couldn't vote. They had no power to change laws that were unfair. These days, my uncle encourages our community to vote in elections. We make our voices heard. 11 more profiles explore and celebrate A, the identity of a student, B, a core belief they hold, and C, how the community the student belongs to is working towards supporting that core belief. Each of these layers are supported by Laura Freeman's quilting of illustrations. Those illustrations contain the feature community's past and present. Reflective opportunity 1. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to pause this video and take the time to read I'm an American. After or intermingled with several readings, please use the discussion questions in the back. At the top of every set of Welcoming Library discussion questions is the invitation to explore this story and your own. In the I do, we do, you do model, you will be exploring your own story in preparation for helping your students develop a positive identity. Your answers to the discussion questions can be internal or written out in your journal, your choice. Reflective opportunity 2. All of your reflective opportunities are on the page below this video. You will notice a timestamp after the opportunity that will allow you to return to this video at any time and pick up where you left off. This is a paper craft, the structure of which you might recognize from your childhood, that will allow you to process your identities and beliefs and the actions, real or envisioned, that uphold those beliefs. The final product of this paper craft is best when it's shared. I invite you to share the book and activity with colleagues at a time in the future. Synergies emerge between individuals that do this activity together.
Let's explore the ways you can model a growth mindset. In that mindset, you will become comfortable with discomfort. You will take risks and quite possibly make mistakes in front of your students. Teaching self-awareness using immigrant and new generation picture books requires us to examine how little we know about the world. Creating a class that encourages a mistake-friendly environment is not taught in most settings where educators are trained. To continue to grow as educators in the 21st century, we are asked to address the social-emotional needs of our students. Talking about race, culture, intersection, and identifying personal, cultural, and linguistic assets is not only big work, but work that educators in the Pine Project found that they truly love doing. Throughout the pilot, we learned that this requires us to pivot away from the assigned and standardized routines that we found in most SEL programs. Many of our educators discovered themselves developing new interests and a sense of purpose teaching SEL using immigrant and new generation picture books. We'll start this work by exploring our own assets and identities, reading picture books, and using reflective opportunities to explore names, family structure, and culture.
Thank you for the work you did with I'm an American to explore your identities and beliefs. Our identities began before we're even born. In the picture book, Alma and How She Got Her Name, you will learn that Alma has a very long name. You can see here that when Alma writes her full name, she runs out of paper and needs to tape on an extension. "My name is so long, Daddy, it never fits," Alma said. "Come here," he said. "Let me tell you the story of your name. Then you decide if it fits." Her father proceeds to tell Alma about the 5 ancestors who she is named after. Alma discovers not only a biological connection, but a connection of commonalities. She likes the things that her ancestors liked. Alma concludes, "I love the story of my name." Reflective opportunity 3. Please pause this video and read Alma and How She Got Her Name. Then pull out your journal and write about the story of your name. Welcome back. My first name, Kirsten, reflects my Danish ancestry. As you may have noticed, people pronounce my first name many different ways. I've never cared how people say my name, as my Danish-born immigrant grandparents pronounce my name far differently than my first-generation mother does. Every time my name is said incorrectly, I remember the heavily accented and culturally perfect way my Nana and Papa greeted me. Reading Alma and How She Got Her Name brought their pronunciation back to me, which was a total gift. While I have never minded my name pronounced differently, mispronunciations can have a profound effect on positive identity development and inclusion in a space.
By the time I was 11, I lived in 3 different cultures. In each culture, I adopted a different variation of my name. I was born in Rwanda and named Ange Krista Ishimwe. In Rwanda, I was referred to by my birth name, Ange. When I started school in Uganda, where schooling is in English, people had difficulty pronouncing my name, so I began introducing myself as Angel. Upon moving to the United States, I encountered similar issues with teachers and classmates mispronouncing my name, so I adopted a name my white teachers would recognize, Angie. Looking back, I recognize that something as simple as a Google search of the pronunciation of Ange would have taught my teachers and classmates how to pronounce my name. As I got older, I realized me adopting Angie was also me conforming to societal pressures and prioritizing others' comfort over my own. I now introduce myself as Ange, but also respond to Angie because of the number of years I've used the name. Fortunately, I view the different variations of my name as representing all the different experiences and stages in my life. Names are an extremely important and personal part of people's identities.
Your family structure and how your family supported you is a large part of your identity development and the identity development of your students. I'd like to introduce you to Wherever I Go, the story of Abia's years in the Shemelba refugee camp in Ethiopia. You will see in the background of one of the spreads that Abia's parents are forced to flee their home when armed gunmen invade their village. Not only do her parents have the strength to make an arduous journey with a younger Abia strapped to their backs, but in the camp, the parents have the strength to create an environment where Abia is empowered. That empowerment is particularly notable as the life of the refugee can be described as powerless. Abia's father weaves her a crown and declares her the queen of Shemelba camp. This crowning of Abia allows her to move through her day with confidence and joy. Reflective opportunity 4. I'd like you to read wherever I go and then journal. Write about where you were born, what your family structure was like as a child, and write about who in your life was able to crown you or help you feel confidence and joy, even in the hardest of circumstances. I know that some of us did not have that person or have not yet found that person. If that is the case, when and where did you find your confidence and joy at Abia's age and now? Add some notes about what you have learned about refugee camp life and what questions you still have. In the picture book, The Carpet, Dej Azad presents us with a loving family, much like Abia's. This Afghan family's daily life is centered around a single cultural object, a carpet. On that carpet, they prepare and share meals and play games and tell stories. They also remember a war that has separated them from their country, culture, community, and loved ones. A bookmark for later. I ask you to note the spread where the girl is not in her family setting, but on the school playground. She says in that location, "Though I'm small, I know it's wrong to never fit, never belong." Later, we will explore how we identify a student who feels disconnected from home in a way that affects their belonging in school and what we can do about it. Reflective opportunity 5. Read The Carpet, don't miss the incredible author notes, and explore the discussion questions. One discussion question reads, each of the pages ends with the phrases, "This carpet is for ... Whether or not your family feels centered around a carpet, your family, like this Afghan family, may also spend time together prepping, helping, sharing, caring, playing, learning, listening, and remembering. What is the cultural background of your family? Explain how your home or family culture interacted with the activities of prepping, helping, sharing, caring, playing, learning, listening, and remembering. Is there a single object like the carpet that represents your family's culture? When did that home or family culture conflict with school culture in a way that made you feel like you didn't belong? Add notes about what you've learned about the Afghan community and what you still have questions about. Oftentimes, our cultural identity or family story is not complete. We can discover aspects about our cultural or ancestral history throughout our lifetime. The girl in Watercress, after expressing anger with her parents, is told a crucial missing detail of her cultural and family past. Reflective opportunity 6. Please read Watercress and then return to hear author Andrea Wong explore the importance of knowing our stories and the stories of others.
Watercress is, at its heart, a story about feeling like you don't belong and feeling disconnected from your heritage. The girl in the book is, like me, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who want to protect her and her older brother from, the hardness and the sadness of life. So they don't share many of their own memories about growing up in a country that suffered from war and famine. But this leads to a gap in the girl's knowledge of her family history. which in turn leads to anger and shame about her family and her heritage. You know, it's really not until after her mother shares a story about her own childhood and the difficulty in it that the girl realizes her parents' actions are rooted in a history that she knew nothing about. And her perspective on her parents and her own identity shifts. And she ends up feeling more connected to her family and to her heritage. So I think it's really important to discover the stories of the generations that came before us, because learning more about your family history can grow and change your outlook on your own life. Memories are essentially stories, and just like fictional stories, they can transform people's lives. For me and for the girl in Watercress, knowing more about my family's history broke down walls of resentment and misunderstanding that I had built between myself and my parents. So not only did I develop more empathy for my parents after they shared their stories with me, I think I became a more compassionate person. So much history isn't being taught in schools, particularly the histories of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian Americans. So it really does fall to the elders to teach us this history and the lessons that accompany it. So it's really amazing that through books that tell these stories, we can learn from the elders of many different races and cultures. I believe that we need more books that humanize the immigrant experience, not just to counter racism, but to show children from all different backgrounds that they are seen and they are understood and they are loved.
Reflective Opportunity 7. Take out your journal and reflect on Andrea Wong's statement. Your memories are essentially stories, and just like fictional stories, they can transform people's lives. For me and for the girl in Watercress, knowing more about my family's history broke down walls of resentment and misunderstanding that had built up between myself and my parents. What went unspoken in your family or cultural community that is needed to come out for you to truly understand yourself and others? What did you learn about the Chinese community, and what do you have questions about?
Reading these books and journaling about how they reflect your own identity development may have made you feel vulnerable. Writing down what you learned and still not understanding the featured immigrant and new generation family's culture or background may have also made you feel vulnerable. Vulnerability is at the heart of the work we are doing here. Why vulnerability? Brené Brown's work on vulnerability emphasizes its power in fostering connection, courage, and personal growth. According to Brown, vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but a profound source of strength. She argues that embracing vulnerability allows individuals to experience deeper relationships, take meaningful risks, and develop resilience. In the context of education, the message aligns closely with Brown's view. Vulnerability in the classroom strengthens the connection between educators and students. When educators openly share their struggles and uncertainties, they model the courage to be imperfect, which is a critical aspect of vulnerability. This openness creates a classroom environment where students feel safe to express themselves, take risks, and engage more fully in the learning process. Being vulnerable, educators can help build trust and foster authenticity, which is essential for creating a supportive and inclusive learning environment. We need to take risks and expect to make mistakes, and in doing so, we must remain vulnerable. Remaining vulnerable, it turns out, is a type of superpower that gives our students the wings they need to fly. In Brené Brown's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, she says, when you model communicating your vulnerabilities so that students feel emotionally safe enough to share their anxiety, tension, or fears, you create a community of people who care for one another. This kind of learning equips students to thrive in school and in their lives beyond it. Reflective Opportunity 8. Please watch Brené Brown's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. Transitioning from the concept of vulnerability to culturally responsive teaching, the same principles apply. In culturally responsive teaching, the goal is to recognize and honor the diverse cultural experience of students, similar to the way vulnerability involves acknowledging and embracing our own uncertainties. The book, A Feast for Joseph, gives a window into a concept that native-born American educators may not have a reference for. A boy who on the outside presents as joyful and motivated is experiencing culture shock. He and his mother are alone in a new home. Joseph deeply misses the smell of yen burning on the cook fire at the refugee camp, the many people who sat around that fire, and the boys who played awal by the light of the moon. Because educators are focused on keeping students engaged in fast-paced learning environments, they have the tendency to move from description to interpretation. We, like Joseph's teacher, may see a description, the happy and motivated disposition that Joseph presents, and not move into interpretation to connect more deeply with Joseph's need to cook for his teacher. Educators who practice culturally responsive teaching understand that our students need to be seen. Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond is an extremely valuable text. I encourage you to borrow or purchase the book and examine it and your own teaching practice in full. In the meantime, I would like to share some core teachings of Zaretta Hammond's using the characters from the picture book, A Feast for Joseph. Reflective Opportunity 9. Please read the picture book, A Feast for Joseph. Let's revisit how Zaretta Hammond integrates personal and social identities. Think of the brain as a computer's hardware and culture as its software. Educators are always trying to find the best way to access our students' cognitive functioning. It turns out that accessing students' culture isn't only enjoyable, it's essential to help students do higher order thinking and problem solving. Deep culture is where we find the kinds of connections with our students that can activate learning. In Zaretta Hammond's book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, she examines 3 levels of culture. The 3 levels of culture Hammond presents us with are surface, shallow, and deep. Building the awareness of these cultural levels allows educators to create schematic connections to become culturally responsive. We'll explore all 3 levels using examples from A Feast for Joseph. Let's begin with surface level culture. This level of culture refers to observable elements of culture that carry a low emotional charge. If we think of the characters in A Feast for Joseph, surface culture is represented in the way Joseph brings Kuan and Deknor to school while all the other kids have sandwiches. We see food and not culture behind that food. We've all engaged with surface level aspects of different cultures. For example, you might have a favorite restaurant that serves food from another culture. While you enjoy the restaurant and all its dishes, do you understand the cultural significance behind the cuisine? Next, let's dive into shallow culture. The shallow level of culture is made up of unspoken rules around everyday social interactions and norms, such as courtesy towards elders, the nature of friendships, concept of time, personal space, nonverbal communication, and rules about eye contact or appropriate touching. At this level of culture, we enact our deep cultural values. Nonverbal communication, which builds rapport and trust between people, emerges from shallow culture and carries a strong emotional charge. It is at this level that we interpret certain behaviors as disrespectful, offensive, or hostile. At this level, social violations of norms can lead to mistrust, tension, or social friction. Has there been a time when someone acted in a way that went against the social norms of your culture? How did that make you feel? And how did you respond? In A Feast for Joseph, Joseph's shallow culture shows itself in the misunderstanding he is having with Whoosh. Joseph keeps looking for someone to eat with. Whoosh keeps saying, "I'm here," but Joseph is looking for the kind of meal sharing that includes people who he has a deep cultural connection with. His grandmother, other family members, and the Acholi community that would gather around an open fire when food was cooked and shared. The last level of culture presented to us by Zaretta Hammond is deep culture. At this level, culture is made up of implied knowledge and unconscious assumptions that govern our worldview. It also contains our notion of good and bad, which guides ethics, spirituality, health, and theories of group harmony, such as competition or cooperation. Deep culture also influences how we learn new information. Elements at this level have an intense emotional charge, and mental models help the brain interpret threats or rewards in the environment. Challenges to cultural values at this level produce culture shock or activate the brain's flight or fight response. For example, in A Feast for Joseph, deep culture may be the communal meal sharing and effortlessness of coming together. The American dominant culture of making dinner dates with busy people runs counter to this. I think you see him settle into his deep culture when Whoosh and his mother finally join him for a meal. The text reads, "Slowly a hum settles around them, a rhythm, a beat of people eating together, even if today it is only two more." Joseph has recaptured something deep from his former culture within his new culture. A tangible example of the layers of culture can be seen through how Thanksgiving is celebrated in many U.S. households. Serving turkey on Thanksgiving is an example of surface culture, a visible and widely recognized tradition. In shallow culture, this dish symbolizes gratitude and what is often taught as a pivotal moment in U.S. history, where the indigenous Wampanoag community helped the Pilgrims survive during a great time of need. However, it's important to acknowledge the growing awareness and critique of this holiday, especially from indigenous communities and others who challenge the dominant narrative. The popular story of Thanksgiving, which celebrates cooperation and unity, is in stark contrast to the historical reality. Sometime after the so-called first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims attacked the very Wampanoag community that had helped them. Furthermore, the broader story of white European settlers involves the systematic displacement and decimation of indigenous peoples across the Northeast and eventually the entire continent. While many Americans celebrate Thanksgiving as a time for gratitude and community, it is an emotionally challenging and difficult day for indigenous communities. The discomfort many of us feel when confronted with this complex history stems from a deeper cultural belief, our deep culture, that the founding story of the United States is one of harmony and mutual respect. This belief is challenged by the truth that the foundation of our country involved significant violence and betrayal. To explore Thanksgiving traditions through a lens that respects this deep cultural understanding, I recommend the picture book, If You Lived During the Plymouth Thanksgiving, by Chris Newell, a proud citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe. This book provides a more nuanced and culturally responsive perspective on Thanksgiving, offering a way to engage with the holiday that honors the full depth of its history. Let's listen as education and immigrant family advocate Abusana Miki Bando shares how not getting beyond shallow culture can reinforce stereotypes and misconceptions.
When I advocate for cultural diversity in education and observe the situation in Maine, where I live, I noticed that the diversity people often discuss is mostly superficial. While Maine is culturally diverse, we need to delve deeper to truly understand and appreciate each other's culture, including what we contribute and how we enrich our classrooms. Without taking the time and effort to understand different cultures, we risk unintentionally fostering implicit bias and forming misconceptions and stereotypes. If we don't or can't grab student culture, it becomes more challenging to connect with and understand them and their behaviors. However, by understanding or be open to learning about student culture, it becomes easier for students to connect and communicate with educators. For example, I remember my son coming home from schools and saying, "Oh, mommy, we have Asian students." And the teacher says they are also competent in mathematics. While being good in math is not a negative trait, the teacher's generalization about all Asian students is harmful because it attributes their success to their identity rather than their individual skills. Additionally, this stereotype can cause Asian students who may not excel in math to question their identity and sense of belonging. Another reason this statement is harmful is due to the power dynamics between the teacher, the Asian students, and my son and his classmates. Educators' opinions and views hold significant power and influence in shaping children's opinions and lives, because the stereotype came from someone in the position of authority, an adult and a teacher. My son was more inclined to believe it and adopt the same opinion. As parents, guardians, educators, and adults in general, we set the tone for children.
Yes, Mickey, we set the tone for children. When we do not take in all the layers of a child's culture into account, we risk stereotyping them. Stereotypes lead us to sometimes commit microaggressions. If, for example, Mickey's son's teacher asked an Asian student why they did badly on a math test and implied that they should have done better given their community's strength in math, that would be a microaggression. Reflective Opportunity 10. Please read Abuelita and Me, explore its discussion questions, and then follow with a journal entry about your understanding of microaggressions. When you come back, educator Javier Botana and Leonarda Carranza will discuss how microaggressions can feel to a child.
The girl witnesses mean faces, impatience, dismissal, and finally, a racist aggression directed at her abuelita. Why was it important to you to show how Latinas can be treated in white communities?
It was really important for me to write about racism and specifically microaggressions and the day-to-day experience with racism because it's so much a part of our lives. It's not the central part of our lives, but sometimes as a kid, when I experienced these things, I didn't always have the language for it. And sometimes what ended up happening for me as a child was that I internalized what happened and I thought that maybe if I did something different, that maybe it wouldn't have happened. And so I thought of my experiences with racism and my family's experiences with racism as something that I could avoid by changing my behavior. And also, most importantly, that it was my fault. That, if I acted differently or if I spoke differently, then maybe I could be treated fairly or with kindness, right? So this was really important for me because I wanted to create this story for a younger audience so that we can start having these conversations earlier with kids and we can give them the language to name what's going on. And hopefully, and this is the thing that's the most important for me in terms of writing the story, is so that young people don't internalize this and think that it's their fault, that it's something that they did wrong, that it's something that they should change about themselves in order for the world to treat them with fairness and with kindness. Yeah.
Leonardo Carranza classifies microaggressions as a form of racism. That may or not be a leap for you. Your understanding of racism may be affected by the way you have developed a racial identity. Here we hear from author, illustrator, and speaker, Anne Sibley O'Brien.
Everyone develops a racial identity. There's a wonderful book, which I highly recommend, by Beverly Daniel Tatum called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? It's about racial identity development. And in that book, she explains that we develop our identities based on what is made salient for us. Or in other words, the mirrors that are held up for us. As young people, we come to understand who we are in the world and in relation to other people by how other people respond, what they say, how they act, and often what they don't say. When it comes to racial identity development, I think one of the most useful aspects to focus on is the difference based on whether you are raised as a racial minority or a racial majority. For instance, in the US, because white people are the majority, white identity is culturally dominant. And therefore, in a curious way, even though it's so pervasive, it also becomes invisible because no one ever talks about it, since as the norm, it's assumed. And therefore, there's silence around it. That means people don't get a chance to discuss, to explore ideas about what it means to be a member of the majority group, in this case, what it means to be white. Without conscious experiences of racialization, seeing yourselves in those mirrors that emphasize your racial identity, there may be a lack of awareness, of reflection, resulting in that aspect of your identity being somewhat invisible even to you. At the same time, racial groups which are non-dominant, in the US, everyone else who's not white, these groups are the minority, not the norm, and they're often marginalized. As a result, that non-dominant identity actually becomes highly visible because other people are always holding up a mirror that says to you, you're different. And therefore, there's a lot more awareness, a lot more processing, a lot more learning, in particular, because when you have a minority identity of any kind, your survival depends on understanding your own experience, and also on understanding the majority, who have power and dominance that could impact your life in really dramatic ways. And in the case of race, this aspect of your identity becomes highlighted as a result of so many experiences of racialization. Here's a real-world example of how majority and minority identity can operate. Think of a boys' soccer team. As people observe and/or comment on a team member's playing, at no point are they likely to notice or mention the fact that a player is male. It's assumed. After all, it's the boys' soccer team. But imagine that a single girl joins the boys' soccer team. As people watch her playing, her gender is likely to be part of any observation and comment. Everything she does seen in the light of her minority identity as the only girl. So, one of the things to keep in mind as a teacher is the difference in racial identity between students from majority dominant groups and those from minority non-dominant groups. If you have students of color who are raised in the US in your classroom, for instance, it's possible that they may have a lot more awareness about how racial differences and how race work, and be more astute and more experienced in talking about it than students and quite possibly teachers who have been socialized as members of a majority group.
When discussing racial identity, it's important to recognize that even well-intentioned comments or actions can sometimes manifest as microaggressions, subtle yet impactful behaviors that reinforce stereotypes and contribute to feelings of exclusion. We might find ourselves caught off guard by how people react when our intention is simply to learn more about them or to complement a racial or cultural difference we notice. It can be easy to dismiss their reaction by telling ourselves that they're being overly sensitive as a way to make ourselves feel more comfortable. I'm leaning into the term subtle acts of exclusion to describe and communicate the ways in which I might unintentionally make others feel unwelcome or marginalized. In their book, Subtle Acts of Exclusion, Tiffany, Jana, and Michael Barron explain the subtle and confusing things that people say and do that end up excluding people with marginalized identities are sometimes mislabeled as microaggressions. The reality is, there's nothing micro about it. These subtle acts of exclusion, though often unintentional, can have a significant impact on those who experience them. It's about shifting our perspective and becoming more aware of how our words and actions might be received even when our intentions are good. This awareness allows us to build more authentic and respectful connections with others, honoring their identities and experiences in a meaningful way.
Reflective Opportunity 11. It's time for you to take the implicit bias test. The American Psychological Association defines implicit bias as an unconscious negative attitude against a specific social group which influences people's perceptions and behaviors. Perspective is based on experiences and learned associations between particular qualities and social categories, such as race and/or gender. Taking the test is a revelation. It's also challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it's essential to doing this work. Project Implicit has a variety of different tests, each designed for different biases. Start with the Race Attitudes Implicit Association test, but feel free to explore as many tests there as you would like. These tests can help you better understand yourself and identify areas where you need to work on improving your awareness and attitudes. So please open your favorite search engine and go to the Harvard Implicit Associations test. I really encourage you to take this test.
To be committed to anti-racism means continually working on all the things that come up in ourselves when we're engaged in the work. This is how we truly become part of the solution, not just contribute to the problem. Because as soon as we're actively engaged in multiracial spaces, all our biases, especially all the baggage that comes with majority identity, will show up. For instance, you may struggle with guilt, which may manifest as a fear of getting it wrong. That interior voice that runs nonstop in your head when engaging in cross-racial interactions. I am so going to do something stupid in about 30 seconds, which can make those interactions very awkward. Observing myself in this state, I always feel apologetic to others. Why should this person have to put up with my stuff like that? So it's something that I try hard to work on so that it's not leaking out all over other people. It's not the job of others, particularly not of people of color, to reassure, comfort, or pardon me, or give me permission to be myself, to make me feel better. I need to reach for my own sense of my own goodness, my authentic self, my courage, my commitment to this work, and my intention to deconstruct anything that stands in the way of authentic relationship across difference. That's just an example of the kind of work that we can do to give ourselves a solid foundation. In those places where we have strengths, how do we build on those? And in those places where we have challenges or need remedial work, perhaps there's a group of people you maybe have never met at all, never had any interaction with, or possibly a group about whom you know you've been taught misinformation. How do we fill in those gaps or correct the mistakes? How do we clearly analyze where we are, Then identify areas of struggle where we can build strength. How can we find our ever-changing edge of growth and keep moving forward?
Congratulations on getting to this point. When you're ready to do the exciting work of finding that ever-changing edge of growth that Anne mentions, please move on to the social awareness module.
I'm Kirsten Cappy, the Executive Director of I'm Your Neighbor Books. This professional development was created at a particular time with a particular community of voices. Language, terminology, and perspectives constantly evolve and should evolve. At the time you navigate this training, those evolutions may have already taken place on any detail of this professional development. In 1993, Brian Street, academic anthropologist, coined the phrase, "Culture is a verb." It is an ever-flowing and evolving path to remaining curious. While these learning modules are fixed in time, the impact is fluid. The impact is a verb. Because cultural humility means we use the most up-to-date information, but also listen to the voices that came before us. This is an acknowledgement that we have and will make mistakes. We too are evolving. Our mission here is to guide all of us towards the pivotal goal of fostering a more equitable society. Thank you for doing this work with us.